Tonight's program is The Nine Named Hills of Shrewsbury by Bill Davis. He's right here, our good friend from the Historical Society. This is an interesting and entertaining look at the 9 hills in town that are greater than 500 feet, plus the people and events that are associated with each hill. We will uncover the names, locations, height, and historical facts, significant or unexpected. Each hill is named that is hidden in plain sight. For Shrewsbury, resident for over 60 years, Bill Davis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. And we'll swap places here. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out on a cold, blustery night that's more like a January night than it is a November night. Either you were looking for someplace warm to go or you were sick of raking leaves, one or the other. But I thank you very much for coming. Anyway, I'm going to skip my bio, which is probably customary for guest speakers. It's not interesting. It's, well, I don't know. But it's not pertinent to my talk tonight. Instead, I would like to talk about my joining the Historical Society back around in 2005. And soon after that, I participated in an annual event called the Third Graders History Day, where I participated as a costumed interpreter in the museum upstairs. And the museum upstairs is a fine collection of Shrewsbury memorabilia. I won't wear this for the entire talk, thank you. But it's a great event. We bring the students from the public schools to the center of Shrewsbury, where they get introduced to a lot of Shrewsbury's history, the 1797 Sumner Home, the 1903 Howe Library, the historic corner of the cemetery where some of our notables are buried, and they have a lecture at the Congregational Church, and then the Historical Society welcomes them to this building where frequently we give them a slideshow then and now in this room, and then we take them upstairs for a tour of our great collection. Now, I've had a lot of fun with this over the years. I bring in my scrapbooks with pictures I've taken, and each year I try to find something a little bit new to tell the kids, their teachers, and their chaperones. I like to call them nuggets. And so I'm kind of hoping that as I go through tonight's talk, you're going to find a couple of nuggets too. Some of these nuggets that I have talked to the kids about are something like Balance Rock, or the Rocking Stone, also called a poet. Okay, granted, that's a lot bigger than a nugget. It's the size probably of a Volkswagen. But nevertheless, each year I try to introduce them to something a little bit new. Additionally, I've been a member of the Shrewsbury Men's Club. And for about 4 years, I was responsible for booking all of the guest speakers for our weekly meetings. Well, every now and then the stars don't align and you can't get somebody, or the night before or an hour before the meeting, you get that call, and I say, I can't make it. Okay, so then what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? No. So I had to be prepared with a backup plan, and so I used to prepare different talks to be able to present in the case of a no-show speaker. Tonight's talk comes out of one of those backup Plan B talks that I did for the Shrewsbury Men's Club. So now, I do want to thank Dan McCullum of the Shrewsbury Engineering Department first for providing this map for us. We were unable to kind of shrink it down to put the entire map of Shrewsbury all on one screen. So Linda's going to help me in a few minutes to move around a little bit as we go around town and explore these hills. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of names, places, dates, statistics throughout this talk. And so I am going to ask if you would please hold your questions until I'm done. That'll save us a lot of time. I won't get sidetracked. And because I'm gray-haired and old, I could forget an awful lot. And I don't want you to miss anything because I think there's some cool stuff here. So I'm going to start with a little introduction of some places with elevations. And my intention here is to put our Shrewsbury Hills in perspective, not to minimize our hills. So I'll start with that, and as I say, please hold your questions until the end. So if you've traveled to the Midwest or even Texas, you know that the land is remarkably flat as compared to our very hilly terrain here in New England. Why, if you just travel a short ways north of here, we have Wachusett Mountain. Wachusett Mountain stands at 2,006 feet high and is Algonquin Indian for Great Mountain of Hope. And if you travel just a little further north, across the New Hampshire state line, we have Mount Monadnock. Picturesque and visible for some distance. It sort of jumps up out of the landscape. Monadnock is Indian for stands alone. Seems appropriate, doesn't it? Well, the Mount Washington, 6,288 feet. Now that's the granddaddy of all the hills in New England. Washington is Indian for darn cold and windy. I'm just kidding. But speaking of wind, the blizzard of 1978 had winds of 92 miles an hour recorded out on Cape Cod. The hurricane of 1938 had winds of 189 miles an hour as recorded at the Blue Hills Observatory. But the highest winds we've ever had recorded in the United States was April of 1934, and you guessed it, top of Mount Washington. So now, we have some high hills in Massachusetts. Mount Greylock is the highest. Most documentation I find has the elevation of that at 3,491 feet. It's located in a small town not far from North Adams, out in the Berkshire. Lanesborough, I think, is the town. And that's an interesting hill with fabulous views. And the highest elevation in North America is Mount Denali, formerly Mount McKinley, formerly Mount Denali. It was changed by President Obama from McKinley to Denali. Denali is Native Alaskan for the high one. So now our neighbors to the west of us, the great city of Worcester, makes a lot of the fact that they have 7 hills. A lot of organizations adopt that name, 7 hills this and 7 hills that. But hey, Shrewsbury's got hills. We've got more than 7 hills. We've even got more than 9 hills. But the 9 named hills, those that have official names and those that are greater than 500 feet, are the ones that I'm going to focus on tonight. So I think I'm going to start now with our first hill. And I'll start with perhaps the one that comes to mind, the best known or the most popular hill in Shrewsbury. Well, growing up and for as long as I can remember, we simply called it Ward Hill. Right? Okay, yeah. So paperwork for the advertising for the ski operation a while back at one time said that the The hill derived its name from our famous General Artemus Ward. All right. Now, a lot of people believe that this hill at Ski Ward, down here at the Northborough line, is the highest hill in Shrewsbury. Okay, but no. Answer D, none of the above. At only 529 feet, Ward Hill is the smallest of the hills that I'm going to talk about tonight. In spite of the ski area, it has virtually nothing to do with Artemus Ward. He did live about a mile up the street. And it would be kind of humorous to visualize the portly general in his three-cornered hat, cape, shooshing down the hill and over the moguls. But furthermore, and some of you Shrewsbury history buffs know this, it's not even Ward Hill. It's Union Hill. And it's been Union Hill since the Civil War, when bonfires were set on the top of the hill to communicate and to celebrate Union Army victories. And these bonfires could be seen from upwards to 7 surrounding towns, weather permitting. Now, prior to the Civil War, the hill was named Maynard's Hill. And it was called Maynard's Hill after a farmer, a William U. Maynard, who owned many acres down in that part of town. It was in 1898, 1898, when workers hired by Maynard to dig a deep trench uncovered bones of what's the word I want? An extinct mastodon. They had bones and teeth. The bones were donated to the Natural History Society in Worcester and put on display, that organization we now know as Ecotarium. So, Union Hill is currently part of a 64-acre farm owned for many years by Bruce and Lucy Ward. Lucy Ward received the Shrewsbury Historical Society's Spirit of Shrewsbury Award, and very deservedly so, last year. And many of you remember Bruce Ward, his quick wit and his interesting stories, some of them that he related right here in front of this room a few years back. And perhaps some of you will recall his dark green truck, the 1961 Mack truck that brought trailer load after trailer load of goods to Shrewsbury to be sold at Spags. Bruce drove that truck in the 2006 Spirit of Shrewsbury parade to honor his friend Anthony Spag Borgatti. The family still has the truck. They've got that and a few more, and they are good enough to put those trucks on display at truck shows each year. Now, Bruce was the third generation in his family to own this farm. His grandfather, William Bennett, in 1913, bought the Stanley Johnson farm. He then proceeded to drive all his livestock to Shrewsbury, to his new farm in Shrewsbury, from his farm in Worcester, located at 500 Salisbury Street. Now, I don't know the route he took, but I'm kind of thinking it might have been down Lincoln Street, mostly because this took place prior to the building of the Burns Memorial Bridge in 1918. But if you can try to visualize this, 35 head of cattle coming down Lincoln Street, across the bridge at Lake Quinsigamon, and all the way up to Shrewsbury to Bruce's farm down here opposite the hill. Something like a Western cattle drive out of a John Wayne movie, Pilgrim. Okay. So if Ward Hill isn't Ward Hill, I didn't point out where Ward Hill was. I think everybody knows. His main circle and Ward Hill is right down here opposite the Johnson farm where the Wards live. So if Ward Hill isn't Ward Hill, is there a Ward Hill? Well, if so, where is it? Well, yes, Virginia, and everybody in this room's old enough to catch that joke. Yes, Virginia, there is a Ward Hill. And Ward Hill is located about halfway between Main Street East and Route 9 on the west side of Walnut Street. Now, it's largely residential area today, but the slope of the hill does tend to feed a small body of water that you can see on that map, Eaton Pond. Now, the combination of Eaton Pond, the wetlands around it, and a town right-of-way create somewhat of an unofficial town park, very popular with the neighborhood kids. You can almost hear the kids today. Let's take this slimy green frog home to Mom. Maybe she'll let us keep it as a pet. Okay. So the question comes up then, if this is Ward Hill, is that named after Artemis? No, I'm sorry, it isn't. It's named after other people with that name who owned and farmed that territory around on the west side of Walnut Street. Okay, now, before you start feeling sorry for the old general, perhaps you'll be happy to know that there's a 30-foot tall statue of him in Washington, D.C. on Ward Circle. It was financed by Harvard University and erected in 1938 as a tribute to the first commander of the Continental Army. And if that's not enough, maybe you'll be happy to know that in 1778, there was a town here in central Massachusetts that was named after him, incorporated in 1778, and named Town of Ward. Well, that was great. Unfortunately, the postal system had too much confusion with his brand new town of Ward and an existing town of Ware that they forced the town of Ward to change its name. Hardly seems fair. Today, we know that town as Auburn. So those are the two hills, and we have a little difficulty by not being able to shrink this map, but I do want to point out something here. We have Route 140 running north and south, and we have Route 9 running east and west. And the result of those two roads divides each part of the town into quadrants, 4 quadrants. So my next hill is going to be down here in this lower quadrant, and I'll ask Linda to just kind of move that up. Okay, thank you. So before Shrewsbury was Shrewsbury, a fellow by the name of Joseph Robbins sold 1,683 acres to a John Haynes. That property was all located down in this southwest quadrant of town. Some of that property thereafter retained the name Robbins Farm. The property was divided and subdivided over the years with family names such as Flagg, Allen, Monroe, Winchester, and Harrington. And it was in 1898 when Boston wool merchant Warren Hobbs, and his wife Annie purchased a fairly good-sized part of land down in this quadrant. And they built a home on the side of Prospect Hill. Now, Prospect Hill has nothing to do with Prospect Street and nothing to do with Prospect Park. It was named Prospect Hill, and it's 592 feet high. So now, Warren and Annie were there for a while, and then they gave this mansion to their son Conrad. That's not too bad. Guy gets a mansion, acres of land, probably furnished. Well, I got a toaster and a food blender. Well, anyway, that home was sold to the John Bath family and is currently the home of Mr. and Mrs. Edward Flynn, the owners of the Flynn Trucking Center. The property, I almost want to mention, it's not in my notes, but I kind of want to mention it. Warren and Annie also had a daughter. Her name was Henrietta. And she didn't fare too badly either. Her parents gave her a mansion. They gave she and her husband a mansion, the Bull Mansion in Worcester, currently a restaurant on Pearl Street. Formerly the Great Army of the Republic Meeting Hall, and once the home of the daughter of the gunmaker Winchester, who originally bought the home for her and his daughter and her husband, the doctor. And we perhaps kind of lost track of that. But Henrietta was married to none other than Major Howard Beale, who was killed July of 1918 in France during World War I, and for which we name Beale School. And of course that's in the news as we prepare to build a brand new Beale School. So in 1932, this property, I didn't say, Warren and Annie were able to give son Conrad, their mansion because they moved to a newer mansion closer to the crest of the hill of Prospect Hill, nearer the top. And in 1932, that home was purchased by Abraham and May Persky, another industrialist. Well, here's where the plot thickens. If I can steal a little bit from the Peanuts comic strip, picture Snoopy at the typewriter, preparing to be his mystery writer, and the words in the frame are always, "It was a dark and stormy night." So it was a dark and stormy night, approaching the midnight hour of July 1st of 1976, when 3 masked intruders cut the phone lines and broke into the mansion. They terrorized the widow Persky and her 2 companions. They stole cash. They stole a car, jewelry and furs, and in particular, 3 very valuable paintings. Now those paintings were eventually recovered and put on in 2006 and put on display at the Worcester Art Museum. In the year 2012, one of the three paintings sold for $1 million. Wow. So, you've heard of the great art heist, and heist sounds so much more sinister than theft or burglary, doesn't it, huh? The art heist, okay, at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Okay, this is the biggest art heist in all of the country, and $5 billion worth of artwork was stolen. It remains unsolved to this day. Well, you may have even heard of the Worcester Art Museum heist. That was May 12th of 1972. Almost $2 million in artwork were stolen from there, and a guard was shot. Well, now you've heard of the great art heist on the top of Prospect Hill. I think our map is going to work out okay here. I am going to move over to this southeastern quadrant. I don't happen to see the street on it to hopefully focused in here. But the sixth highest hill on my list is Green Hill. And it is right along the side of Green Street. And it draws its name not from the lush foliage that might have been there all summer long, but from the families that lived there and farmed the area. What I found particularly interesting about Green Hill at its 596-foot height was the fact that it was situated slightly west of the lowest point in town, a sea level way down, a point at 310 feet above sea level. And that kind of struck me as interesting. Now, one night we had a panel here at the Historical Society, and Reuben LeBeau sat right here. Reuben LeBeau was Selectman John LeBeau's father. And he was recalling the days of farming here in Shrewsbury. And he said that farm, the Green Hill Farm, located on the top of Green Hill, was, in his opinion, the last of the true old working farms in Shrewsbury. Some of you may remember that Reuben LeBeau had also owned a farm. It was the Buttonwood Farm. And that farm, along with a number of other farms, were destroyed by the tornado of June 9th, 1953. His farm's the Buttonwood Farm. Buttonwood was another name for the sycamore tree. Guess it won't surprise you that the wood of the sycamore tree was used to make buttons. Oh, for goodness sakes. So with that, I'm going to move to the northwest quadrant of town, if you would, for me, Linda. Okay. Once again, Route 140 and Route 9, and as you can see, this is Main Street that kind of wanders its way across Lake Quinsigamond. So located up in this quadrant is our fifth highest hill, Sewell Hill. Now, Sewell Pond, Sewell Street, which is right there, it says, Sewell Pond, Sewell Street, Sewell Brook, and Sewell Hill all derive their name from a man by the name of Samuel Sewell. Samuel Sewall was from Boston, and he became the lead judge in the infamous 1691 Salem witch trials. Now, he acquired a great bit of land in this northern quadrant and probably all the way up into Boylston, and there are multiple schools of thought as to how he acquired them. Now, some say that he received that land for his services to the government during the trials. Other folks say, maybe not. He received that land as a gift from his father-in-law, a very wealthy man, the mint master of Boston. And in any event, we really don't have a clear picture of that today, and we don't even quite know exactly what the boundaries of his property were. We're told that he had a home built. I don't think he ever built a home, but he had a home built out on his property. I doubt he ever spent much time there. He did visit this area. He's been said to have tossed silver coins to Indians who dove for them on Lake Quinsigamon. He may have stayed overnight now and then, but we don't know for sure. He never relocated from Boston to Shrewsbury. Folklore has it that somewhere in the vicinity of this home that he built, he buried a treasure. He buried a treasure of silver coins. The treasure's never been found. And of course, we don't know if this is truth or if this is folklore. Today, I don't think I quite have it, but Sewell Hill stands proud and tall at 610 feet as the site of Shrewsbury High School. So this story goes back a ways. I'm going to start with the Goulding family. Goulding, Goulding family. They moved to Shrewsbury in 1790, and they took up farming. Pretty much all the settlers who moved to Shrewsbury took up farming. That was except for their son Abel. Abel Goulding invented a loom and gained some notoriety as a result of it, making lace that was used on carriages and chaise carriages. Now, a chaise carriage is a one-horse, two-wheel carriage suitable for one person and popular with doctors and preachers and well-to-do people, people of means like the son of Artemus Ward, the Sheriff Thomas Ward. Sheriff Thomas Ward drove his chaise carriage in the homecoming parade here in Shrewsbury in 1927. That carriage has been restored and is currently on display down at the Ward homestead. Now, Abel Goulding moved his family and his business into an old building called the Blockhouse. Now, the old Blockhouse was a garrison sort of building, and it was used by early settlers to take refuge during Indian attacks. In 1724, 10 British soldiers, now remember, this is 50 years before our revolution, 10 British soldiers were stationed here in Shrewsbury and 19 more soldiers stationed in Worcester due to what was called Indian troubles. It's kind of my guess that the soldiers were housed in this blockhouse. Fort Shrewsbury, if you will, but you never hear that term ever. Abel had a sister, Millie. Millie was a bright and cheerful young lady who was teaching school in Worcester. That was until she got the news of the sudden death of her fiancé. It caused her to have some form of a breakdown. Thereafter, Millie merely wandered the streets of Shrewsbury, always gentle, always cheerful, never wanting much, but claiming that anything she wanted was miraculously somehow provided for her. Millie was one of our early town characters, and Shrewsbury had no shortage of town characters. So the roads in the early days were numbered. I once heard somebody say, oh, all the roads in the early days were named after trees. No, they were numbered. And most of the roads on this eastern side of town had the single-digit numbers. So road number 2, that's about as low as you can get, was renamed Goulding Road. Well, it's Goulding Road after this family that had lived in this area. And later on, that road was renamed South Street. South Street. So now, the Goulding family lived and farmed right about here opposite Veterans Inc. on a hill 649 feet high that today we know as Golden Hill. I remember as a kid with some of my friends who are here tonight playing on the west side of Golden Hill. Golden Hill is the 4th highest hill in town. Now, I think we can stay right where we are, Linda. I'm going to move to my next hill, the 3rd highest hill in town at 663 feet, is called Temple Hill. Not because of any religious structure that was there, but like with other hills, that was the name of the family who owned the hill. And in fact, there were a number of families with that name in that area. So where is that? Well, see if I can't pick that out for you. It's just slightly north of Route 9, sandwiched between South Street, Price Chopper here, and Grafton Street, Staples Plaza right over here. The hill is half residential today and pretty much half undisturbed land. The one thing that's kind of interest for that hill is that there's a drinking water tank perched close to the top of that hill. It's Temple Hill water tank. It's of the new construction. It's a masonry tank as opposed to a steel tank. It's capable of holding 1 million or more gallons of water. Now, masonry tanks have been preferred lately, and God knows we have enough water problems in town, but the masonry tanks are far less maintenance than the old steel tanks, which required draining and sandblasting and cleaning and rinsing and refilling. This one the masonry tanks, someone told me, and I don't know if it's true, could be cleaned with a robot and a laptop. If that's so, kind of like your swimming pool. If that's true, I guess that would be certainly a time saver. The early days of drinking water tanks, They were called standpipes. I said, when I first heard that, I says, that's kind of a weird name. But then I thought about it. What's a pipe? A pipe is something that holds water. And if you take that pipe and you stand it on its end, well, son of a gun, you got a standpipe. That's exactly what our water tanks are. And we've got 6 of them in town. So the very first water tank was built in 1914. It contained 250,000 gallons, and it was located right about here. After a negotiation with Matthew Whitall and the town, it was put on the top of his property. And later a 375,000 gallon tank was built next to it. And in 2008, one of these brand new masonry tanks was built alongside of those, and the 2 older steel tanks were dismantled. I think we can stay right where we are. I'm going to move on to the next hill. So that was the 3rd hill, Temple Hill, 663 feet above sea level. I have two hills remaining. And as you know, what I've been doing is getting higher and higher and higher. Anybody getting tired from all this hiking? I don't know. All right. Did you tie your hiking shoes up good and you got your walking sticks and all? See, a few of you do. Anyway, I am going to take the last 2 hills out of order. Okay. Bear with me with it. And I'm going to start my story's going to go way back. So a long time ago, I mean a long time ago, there was a young 23-year-old man in Boston by the name of Edward Rawson. And Edward Rawson made his living making gunpowder. Unusual, perhaps, by today's standards. In 1639, Eddie received a grant of some 500 acres of land out in the western wilderness, land that sometime eventually would become Northborough and Boylston and Shrewsbury, as long as he continued to make the gunpowder. Well, he tried. He came out to Northborough area, Boylston area, and Shrewsbury area, and he mined, searching for one ingredient, saltpeter, P-R-T-R-E, a key ingredient in making gunpowder. He even mined at the north end of what we know as Dean Park. Try as he didn't find a whole lot. But he did retain ownership of the land. That property is up in this area in southwest of the highway Interstate 290 and Route 140 interchange. Today it's largely stately homes. And one new homeowner has proudly indicated the highest elevation in town with a stone marker, and that would be 757 feet above sea level at the top of Rawson Hill. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier about a gift, I believe, to the society regarding information on a cross. And Eric and I have had discussions of this in the past. At one time, there was a great big, 30, 40 foot high white cross erected on the top of Rawson Hill. It was quite visible from Route 140, especially at night, because there was a spotlight that shone on that white cross. How many remember it? Yeah, okay, a number of you do. Great. It's my understanding that that spotlight was powered by a wire that came down Rawson Hill to the Sportsman Club. It had been erected by a man by the name of Kasdan, who I've never met, who worked for the Shrewsbury DPW. I'm going on to my last story. I'll start my last story with the 31 men from Marlborough and Sudbury who petitioned the British General Court in Boston to establish a new town to be called Shrewsbury. Boston said, fine, but we require 3 things. We require 40 families. We require a meeting house. Of course, the meeting house back then was an all-purpose structure. At that time, there was no separation of church and state, so the meeting house was the church, the town hall, and probably the civic center. We also require a permanent pastor. So the petitioners said fine, and they set about buying land and making plans. They held 2 meetings for the sole purpose of deciding where will we put this meeting house. Now this was very important because wherever they located that meeting house would establish the center of town. Well, they had a spot picked out. They knew right where they were going to build. And they were just about to build when a William Taylor stepped forward. Hold everything. Let's make a deal. William Taylor said, I think you should build the meeting house right along the Old Post Road. And I own that land, but I'm willing to give you that land in exchange for land elsewhere. Well, they thought it over. The petitioners now, as homeowners or landowners, were now the proprietors of Shrewsbury. And they all agreed, he's right. It should be in the accessible spot right on the Old Post Road. And so it was built, not 50 feet from where the current First Congregational Church is today. They started building the meeting house by 1722. The meeting house was done. By 1723, they had 40 plus families, and they had a minister in place. All requirements were met. And as they say, the rest is history. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So, just where was that original place that they picked for the town center? Where was that place that they were going to build that meeting house? Well, I'll tell you. That would be at the top of the second highest elevation in town, 745-foot high Meeting House Hill. Current site of Prospect Park, former site of the Masonic property and the Matthew Whitall estate. So that pretty much wraps it up. I hope you're not too exhausted from all that hill climbing, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you very much. Deb.
What about the hill, the one that you live near, where the rock is?
Well,
Is that the hill?
Well, you know, there are a number of other hills in town. Some people would say, as they drive up it in the middle of winter, St. John's is St. John's Hill. I'll never get to the top. That is not a hill. That was really the slope of the ridge line, and probably more part of Meeting House Hill than any hill. It is not an official hill name. There is another hill where right around here, the intersection of South Street and Floral, which is 590 feet high, residential, somewhat undeveloped, was never given a name. Has never had a name. There is another very high elevation at the intersection of 140 and Interstate 290. It's up in the 500 plus range. Escapes me at the moment how high it is. It doesn't have a name either. But there is a process to go through if you want that hill named after you. You probably have to justify it. There is a gentleman who lives down on Old Mill Pond who is going through the paperwork of getting a small island named after a rapper that he's fond of. I'm trying to think of the name and it escapes me at the moment. So there is a process if you so desire. But there are a few other elevations. We have Boston Hill down in this quadrant. That's over 500 feet. Its crest is not in Shrewsbury, it's in Westboro. We have another hill, Tomlin or Toblin Hill. It carries all three names. It's kind of a problem. We had that bridge that collapsed and has cost the town $1.5 million to rebuild. But that's over in this area. No, it isn't. It's over in this area. And the crest of that is actually Northborough. Probably the crest is pretty close to the BJ's in that shopping center. There's another hill up here, Bartlett Hill, but that too is in Northborough, and that's a pretty sizable hill. That's nearly 600 feet high. There are other smaller hills, Tomlin would not have made my list. It's only 487 feet, and even though it had a name, and even though it was in Northborough, I would have disqualified it. Sorry. No. Any other questions? Highest hill was Rawson Hill. Rawson Hill, 757 feet. Named after Eddie Rawson, the gunpowder manufacturer. Other questions? Lucy.
I'm almost ashamed to even talk about it because you've done such a wonderful job historically, not hysterically. But there are some things that I don't know the history, but they're very interesting. When they started skiing on the hill, it was in the 30s.
1938, you're right. You told me
The
that.
first rope tow was put up on wheels from an old car. The power takeoff was an old white truck that was driven to the top. And no parking lot, no nothing. Use my phone, my bathroom. Was in 1957 when they finally, it became sort of a commercial thing. And they were going to name it Ward Hill because Bruce's dad was head athletic director in Worcester schools. All the teams, the football teams, the basketball teams, they'd all go down to Coach Ward's. So he, who never had anything but being the son-in-law, ended up with his name. And so in 57, when they decided to make it a hill, they said, well, we'll call it Ward Hill. Everybody goes to Ward Hill. So they tried to get it as a business, and they weren't allowed because there was a Ward Hill ski area in Phillipston, and you aren't allowed to have two with the same name. Back to our ward and all the.
Right up 495, yeah.
story. So, after much research, they found that Ward Hill in Shrewsbury pre-existed before the one started in Phillipston. And if you go up Route 495, somebody in search of Ward Hill to ski on saw the exit on 495 that says Ward Hill.
Right?
That's an industrial park. And the one in Phillipston is now an apple orchard.
Ah, for goodness sakes.
But the nice thing, and I'm not, probably proud is the word. We have had an Olympic skier that skied at Ward Hill. We now have a snowboarder who is aiming for the Winter Olympics through the world rating, world sport. He is now 9th in the world. When the first girl made the Olympics, they took up the slogan, where it all began. Then they have another big issue, because it should be, for the current ones, where it all begins. So I haven't heard how that one's in there. But I appreciate the work, your presentation. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you very much. And I did have it in my notes exactly as you were saying, the rope tow in 1938 and the LaCroix family. The young man that she's referring to is Mickey LaCroix. He's an international medal-winning snowboard champion and a remarkable young man who you may get to shake his hands if you're down there at the hill. He does help the family out with the operation, and I don't think we've heard the last of it. Yes, another question.
One of the interesting facts that I found while living here is that if you go to the eastern side of town, the creeks and streams flow to the Assabet, and then to the Concord, and then to the Merrimack north. And on the western side of town, it flows into the lake, and then down the Quinsigamond to the Blackstone, all the way down to Concord.
Yeah, it's more than interesting, it's almost problematic. And it's really, this Route 140 is pretty much a ridge line. And just as you say, east of this ridge line, which I think was a Indian path that led all the way up to Wachusett Mountain, east of this goes into the Concord River Basin. And west of it flows into the Blackstone River Basin. Well, here's the dilemma. All of our town water wells, where we take the water out of the ground, is in the Blackstone River Basin. We then run it through our system, through the sewer system, and down into Westboro to the treatment system, and put it into the Concord River Basin. Well, the state doesn't like us doing that. I wish they'd told us years before we got involved into that millions of dollars investment into the three-town shared responsibility, shared cost treatment center. And it has resulted in some real issues for the town. They also capped the number of gallons of water per day that we can remove from the town. I believe it was increased to 325,000 gallons a day. And it's really trying to meet the state requirements that they have put out these water restrictions on us, as opposed to us using too much water. And so the town does this phenomenal balancing act of trying to minimize the water that goes into the opposite basin, and keep that balance and keep the state with not coming down on our heads. Any other questions? Okay. Terrific. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.